It was a Friday night in the student quarter near the university. Neon lights cast their glow down onto the rain-wet sidewalk, reflecting in streaks of color like my mood at the time, a little lost, a little hollow, and if I'm being honest, a little lonely. I had just finished a grueling semester and come out the other side of a relationship that never went anywhere. My friends dragged me out to a small bar, saying I needed to blow off some steam. I didn't argue, and then I met him, Connor. He was standing at the bar, leaning back lightly against the wooden counter, a glass of whiskey in hand. Warm amber light fell across his face, tracing the sharp lines of his features, a mature kind of handsome. Nothing like the hot boys you usually saw around campus. The way he looked at me. There was something so calm about it, yet it made my heart stumble over a beat. I can't remember who spoke first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But I remember very clearly what it felt like to talk to him like two strangers who had suddenly found the same frequency. We talked about everything: school, music, vague plans for the future. He didn't ask hollow questions, and I didn't need to perform some better version of myself. Connor listened, really listened, and when he smiled, God, it wasn't loud or showy, just a quiet smile, but enough to make everything around me seem to soften. "What's your major?" he asked. "Literature," I answered, shrugging. Not exactly a practical choice. No, he shook his head, eyes still on me. "A brave one." I don't know why, but I never forgot those words. That night, we left the bar together. No rush, no obvious proposition. It was just natural, as though the two of us walking side by side down a quiet street, sharing an umbrella in the drizzling rain, was simply the way things were supposed to be. His apartment wasn't far. A tidy, warm space, not overly personal, but with something very Connor about it. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds, as if asking myself what I was doing. But then he said quietly, "If you're not comfortable, you can go. It's okay." I looked at him, and I knew I didn't want to leave. That night. Isn't something I can retell in specific details. Not because I've forgotten, but because it isn't the kind of memory that needs to be dissected. It was a feeling warm, close, and real. We didn't only touch each other physically. We talked until late. We laughed. There were silences that weren't the least bit awkward, just two people lying beside each other, sharing the simple fact of being present. Something in me changed. But the next morning, I left before he woke up. I left a small note on the table. "Thank you for a wonderful night, Jake." No phone number. No promises. Nothing at all. I told myself it was the cleanest way. Simple, neat, no strings attached. A beautiful memory that was enough, at least. That's what I thought. 2 weeks later, I walked into the first class of the new semester. Creative Writing 302. I'd chosen it because the instructor was supposed to be demanding, but worth it. And I needed a challenge. I sat in the middle row, opened my laptop, trying to focus as the students around me started to fill the room with noise. A few people talked, a few scrolled their phones. Nothing unusual until the classroom door opened. "Sorry, I'm a little late." That voice. I looked up, and the whole world seemed to stop. Connor was standing at the front of the class. Not in the casual shirt from that night. Not with the relaxed ease of a man at a bar. But in the role of student teacher. He was wearing a white button-up, sleeves rolled neatly, glasses on, more serious looking, but still him. Still those eyes. The eyes that had looked at me that night. The eyes looking straight at me right now. Neither of us said anything. We couldn't. We shouldn't. But in that moment I knew one thing. That night was far from over. I couldn't breathe for the first few seconds. Not a figure of speech. Literally my chest felt like someone had their fist around it. The air caught somewhere between my throat and nowhere. Connor stood there at the front of the class in front of everyone as the student teacher. And I was his student. Damn. "Hello, everyone," he said, his composure startlingly unshaken. "I'm Connor Hayes. I'll be with you this semester as your teaching assistant." Hayes. I hadn't known his last name before. A small detail. But now it made everything feel more real, more concrete, and more dangerous. I lowered my head, pretending to look at my screen, but really just trying to avoid his eyes. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it, But in that brief moment before I'd seen him falter when he saw me. Only for a second. But enough to confirm it. He remembered. In this class, Connor continued, we'll focus on writing as a way to understand yourself. Not just technique, but emotion, experience, and honesty. Each word landed like it was aimed at me. Honesty. How ironic. I was sitting here, in the classroom of the man I had slept with 2 weeks ago, pretending we had never met. There was nothing honest about any of this. We'll start with a simple exercise, he said, turning to write on the board. Write about a moment that changed you. A moment after which you were no longer the same person. I almost laughed. If I wrote the truth, my submission would be about him. The class passed with the slowness of torture. I couldn't concentrate. Every time Connor moved around the room, every time he paused near my desk to see what other students were writing, I went rigid, as if his being too close would expose everything. But he never came to my desk. Not once. That made me feel relieved and, in some confusing way, unsettled at the same time. When the bell rang and students began packing up, talking loudly, I was quick, laptop shut, shoved in my bag. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. Jake, that voice. I stopped dead. Damn. I turned back, doing my best to hold a normal expression. Connor stood a few steps away, a stack of papers in hand, and his eyes were no longer those of a stranger. Can you stay for a moment? He said. I swallowed. Yeah. Okay. One by one, people filed out. The sound of conversation faded, the door closed, and finally, it was just the two of us. A heavy silence fell. Connor set the papers down on the desk, then looked at me. Not a social look. A direct look, deep exactly like that night. I'm guessing. You didn't mention you studied here, he said first. I laughed dryly. I didn't know you worked here either. Fair enough, he nodded slightly. More silence. I hated the way my heart was beating. Hated the way my body reacted to his presence as though the past 2 weeks hadn't existed. About that night, he began. We shouldn't talk about it, I cut in. Faster than I expected. Connor's brow furrowed slightly. Jake? No, I shook my head, gripping my bag strap. We shouldn't. You're an instructor. I'm a student. That thing. It shouldn't exist. I knew I sounded cold. But if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to control myself. Connor looked at me for a long moment. You left without leaving any way to contact you, he said, his voice dropping lower. I thought maybe I had misread things. I went still. Misread? No, I said, quieter. You didn't misread anything. I was just scared. But I didn't say that part. Connor let out a slow breath. All right, he said. I respect what you want. That sentence should have made me feel lighter. But somehow it only made me feel empty. In class, he continued, slipping back into a professional tone, we keep everything clear. No exceptions. Good, I replied quickly, and outside of class. I'll stay out of your way, I said. Connor paused slightly. That's not what I was going to say. I shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. But it's the simplest way. His eyes darkened slightly. The simplest way. Isn't always the right one. I clenched my hand. Don't say any more. Please. I have to go, I said, turning away. Jake. I stopped but didn't turn around. Today's exercise, he said. Don't write what you think someone else wants to read. I closed my eyes for a second. I answered. Then I walked out of the classroom. That night, I sat in front of my laptop staring at a blank page. Write about a moment that changed you. I could write about anything. Family, school, an old relationship. But in my head, there was only one image. Connor, standing under the warm amber light, looking at me as though I were the only person in the room. Connor, lying beside me, his low and warm voice talking about small things. Connor. In the classroom today, keeping his distance as though there had never been anything between us. I sighed, then began to type. I didn't write his name, didn't write the place, didn't write specific details, but I wrote the truth, line by line, word by word, as though if I didn't get it out, I would suffocate. And when I finished, I realized something frightening. I wasn't just affected by that night. I Wanted it back. I submitted the piece the following morning. Didn't edit much. Didn't read back over it too carefully. If I had, I probably would have deleted everything. Replaced it with something safer, less true, less dangerous. But I didn't do that. I sent the most honest version of myself. And the moment I hit submit, I wanted to take it back. The next class was 2 days later. I arrived earlier than usual, chose a seat in the corner of the room far from the board, far from Connor, far from anything that might make me lose control. I told myself I would behave like any normal student, not stare at him too long, not react too much, not let anyone sense that there was a history between us. Simple enough. But when Connor walked in, every one of those plans became almost meaningless. He was the same. Sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled as though he'd rushed to get here, eyes calm but sharp. He greeted the class and began with his professional manner, no trace of awkwardness or discomfort. As though that night had never happened. Part of me felt relieved. The other part felt bothered. Before we get into today's material, Connor said, carrying a stack of submitted work, I went through some of your pieces. My chest tightened slightly. There's one I want to address. Damn. No. Please don't let it be mine. Don't worry, he added, as if reading the whole room's thoughts. I won't name anyone. I swallowed. The piece was technically imperfect, he continued. Some sentences were clumsy, some passages rough around the edges. But, he paused for a beat. But it was real. I felt my hands curl under the desk. There's a passage, Connor said, turning a page, that I think illustrates very clearly what I want all of you to aim for. Couldn't breathe. There are people who step into your life without giving you time to prepare. They don't ask if you're ready. They just appear and somehow make you realize you've been changed whether you wanted to be or not. The room went quiet, and I went completely still. Those were my words. Not a single one different. Writing like that, Connor folded the paper, is when you're no longer trying to impress anyone. It's when you dare to face yourself. He looked up. His gaze swept across the room and landed on me, just for a second, but enough to make my heart go wild. I hope all of you keep working that way. The class continued, but I didn't hear another word of it. When class ended, I didn't rush out. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I wasn't sure I could stand up without my hands shaking. People filtered out one by one. The air slowly grew quieter. I pretended to pack up, stretching the time as though waiting for something I didn't dare name. Jake. The second time this week he called my name. I closed my eyes for a second before turning around. Your piece, Connor said, holding out the paper toward me. I'd like to talk through it. I walked over and took it. There were notes in red pen, not many, but enough to show he had read it very carefully. You shouldn't have read it like that in front of the class, I said, voice low. I didn't name you, but you knew it was me. Connor looked at me, and you knew I was talking about you. I went quiet. Jake, he said, his voice softer, you wrote about it as if it meant something. I laughed, but there was no warmth in it. It did mean something, I said. Just not the way you think. Then what way? I looked at him for a long time, then shook my head. Doesn't matter. Connor exhaled, hands slipping into his pockets. You're trying to push it away. I'm trying to keep things simple. Simple? He frowned. Jake, you wrote an entire piece about being changed by a moment. It was just an exercise, I cut in. No, he said firmly. It wasn't. The air between us pulled taut. I hated how clearly he could see me. I don't want this to get complicated, I said, lowering my voice. You're an instructor. I'm a student. We shouldn't feel something? Connor finished. I said nothing. You think I'm not trying? He continued, his voice dropping lower. From the first day I walked into this room and saw you sitting there, you think I didn't tell myself this is a mistake? I looked up. For the first time, I saw the uncertainty in him. Not the calm, controlled Connor, but the real one. Then why didn't you stop? I asked. Do you want me to stop? That question. Simple. But it knocked the air out of me. I didn't answer. Couldn't Connor looked at me for a few more seconds, then gave a slight nod as if he understood. All right, he said. I won't cross any lines. That sentence. Again. It sounded like a promise, but it left me feeling like I'd lost something. I'll grade your work the same as everyone else's, he continued, slipping back into his professional voice. No favoritism. I don't need favoritism, I replied quickly. I know. A beat of silence. Then, quieter. But I also don't want to pretend you don't matter. I stood there, still, not knowing how to respond. Go, Connor said, turning back to his desk. Before I say something else, I shouldn't. I didn't need to hear more. I turned and walked quickly out of the room. But this time, it wasn't to run away. It was because if I stayed one more second, I wouldn't want to leave anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning over everything that had happened. But I also don't want to pretend you don't matter. The words played over and over. Dangerous. Too dangerous. I knew what I was supposed to do. Keep my distance. Focus on school. Forget that night. Forget him. But the problem was, I wasn't sure I wanted to forget anymore. I started avoiding Connor. Not in a complete way that was impossible when he stood at the front of the room every week. More like a calculated avoidance. Arriving on time and leaving the moment class ended. Not staying to talk. Not looking at him too long. Not letting myself be drawn into dangerous private moments. I became a model student in the strangest sense, quiet, focused, and distant. Connor kept his word too. He stopped asking me to stay after class. Stopped looking at me too long. No more loaded remarks. In class, he treated me like anyone else, fair, professional, and cold. That should have made everything easier. But it didn't. It only made me realize how used to his particular way of looking at me I had become. 3 weeks passed like that. 3 weeks in which we existed in the same space but like two parallel lines, close, but never touching. Until the group assignment came along. I'd like you to work in pairs, Connor said in one of the afternoon sessions. One writes, one edits. Next week you'll switch. A murmur went through the class. People turned to find partners. I hadn't even had time to react when a girl in the row ahead turned around. Jake, do you want to work together? Yeah. I've already assigned the pairs. Connor's voice cut through. The class went briefly quiet. I looked up. He was looking at a list in his hand, but I knew. He was very aware of what he had just done. Jake, he continued, you'll be working with. He paused for a half beat. With me. A soft wave of surprise moved through the class. Sir? Another student asked. You're working with a student yourself? Just this once, Connor replied briefly, as a model for the rest of you. No one objected, but I was frozen in place. He didn't look at me when he said it, as though this were just a normal academic decision. But I knew this was not normal. After class, I had no choice but to stay. The door closed, just the two of us again. But this time, something was different. Sit down, Connor said, pulling out a chair. I did, but kept as much distance as the room allowed. We're going to work on the exercise, he said, his tone even. Nothing else. Clearly, I replied. Connor looked at me for a moment. You don't have to build walls that high. I'm not building anything. Jake, I'm just doing what we said. I cut in, keeping things clear. Connor leaned back in his chair and exhaled softly. All right, he said. Then let us work. The next hour was a kind of slow mental torment. Not because the work was hard, but because the distance between us was too small. We sat across from each other, reading the same passage, discussing the same edits, everything very academic. But every time our hands nearly reached the same piece of paper, every time our eyes met and quickly looked away, the air grew heavy again. This passage, Connor said, pointing at my laptop screen, you're avoiding it. I frowned. What do you mean? You're writing around the problem, he explained. You're not going straight at the emotion. I thought I was being clear enough. No, he shook his head. You're holding back. I tightened my hand. Maybe I don't want to put everything out there. Connor was quiet for a moment. Good writing sometimes means doing the thing you don't want to do. And if I don't want to, then you'll always be writing from the safe place. That landed. I looked at him. Are you always like this? I asked. Always pushing people past their limits? Connor didn't look away. Only when I know they can. The air between us shifted. It was no longer a conversation about the assignment. It was something more personal. You don't know me, I said. I know enough, he answered. My heart beat harder. What do you know? I asked, voice low. Connor didn't answer right away. He looked at me longer than usual, then said slowly, I know you didn't leave that morning because it didn't mean anything. I went completely still. I know you left. Because it did. I stood up. We're not talking about that, I said, voice tense. Connor stood too. Then why do you react every time I bring it up? I don't. Jake. My name, from his mouth, sounded entirely different. No longer a teacher calling a student. It was Connor calling me. We can't keep pretending, he said. We have to, I replied at once. Otherwise everything will. Get worse? He asked. Get worse, I corrected. Connor took one step closer. Just one. But enough to make me step back by instinct. What are you afraid of? He asked. I gave a hollow laugh. You really don't know? Then tell me. I looked at him for a long time, then said, I'm afraid that if I don't stop now, I'll want more. The air seemed to freeze. Connor said nothing for several seconds. Then he asked very quietly, and that is a bad thing? I closed my eyes. In this situation, yes. Connor exhaled. I don't want to put you in a difficult position, he said. But you are. I know. That honesty left me not knowing how to respond. Then stop, I said. Connor looked at me, this time, without hesitation. No. I went still. What did you just say? I said. I can't just stop, he repeated. Not when I know that what's between us. ISNT accidental. My heart hammered. Connor. I want to cross any lines in class, he said quickly. I want to do anything that gets you into trouble. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't want to know you more. Couldn't he breathe? This was exactly what I was afraid of. Not that he didn't care, but that he cared too much. We can't, I said, weaker now. Connor took another step forward. This time, I didn't step back. Are you sure? He asked. The distance between us was only centimeters. I could feel his breath, like that night, exactly the same. Connor. His name fell from my lips like a plea. Not for him to come closer, but for him to stop, though I wasn't sure which one I wanted more.